Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, we are joined by Dr. Bharat Vaishnav. Bharat is an assistant professor of marketing at Cape Breton's University's Shannon School of Business and recently completed his PhD at McMaster University. We will be discussing his research into what he calls the coordination trap, a study that examines the internal costs and complexity of omnichannel marketing. Bharat, it's a great pleasure to have you on that program.
Thank you so much, David. I'm too delighted to be on the show. Looking forward to our conversation.
Bharat, before we get into the research data, I want to talk about your journey. You spent 2 decades in senior management before moving into academia. What was it that you saw in the corporate world that compelled you to step away and pursue a PhD to solve it?
Yeah. Now, this is, many people ask me this question, and I would be happy to talk more about this. Um, I actually, just to give you a bit of a context, I was born and brought up in India in a state called Rajasthan. So I finished my MBA in Rajasthan in early 1990s. So it's a long time back. And I got my first job in Singapore. So I went to work for a retailing company in Singapore. This company was into fashion and footwear retailing company. And so I worked into retail and operations management for that company and moved back to India to work for another retailing company. And that time, I guess, Bata was the only one of the few organized retailing businesses. So I worked for Bata for a number of years. And following then, I also worked for a couple of other retailing companies in primarily in Middle East, in Dubai, for a firm like Next, Next, Next. And so initial part of my industry experience really belonged to retail and perhaps like a first love, first job, and that must have inspired my most of the academic research. And so that was the retail part. Then I briefly also worked in a brand management in a consumer goods company, and immigrated to Canada in early 2000. And I did my MBA again. I cannot get enough of education, so I did my MBA from Schulich School of Business here in York, and briefly worked for a technology company. And then number of years I worked in a strategy slash marketing role for one of the big five banks. So um, when I was doing my MBA here, I had this desire to go to academia, but as a new immigrant, life came in between, mortgage, settling down. That did not work out. But having worked for a number of years, I had an opportunity to teach one term at McMaster. And that kind of rekindled my desire to get back to academia. And, then I applied and it's a journey, a PhD. But I must say that, my wife also kind of nudged me to go to academia, and I'm glad she did that. So long story, but that's how it is.
Oh, wonderful. It's fascinating how that real world fraction stays with you. Bharat, looking back at those last 25 years in retail, what were the major global trends that moved us beyond just having a website to this complex world of omnichannel integration?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this has been a fascinating evolution of the industry. If I were to, for the audience, our audience, which I think is mostly, the PhD or academics as well as the practicing managers, I would characterize this evolution in this sense that when the with the maturation of internet and the growth of digitization in early 2000, um, multi-channel retailing became the dominant form of retailing. And, most of the store-based retailers, they operated the online channel more like another channel, or, there was um, the focus was really more on optimizing each channel. There was really a little coordination across the channel. And I think the one key assumption was that consumers self-select these channels.
Mm,
So they focus really more on optimizing each channel. But then in the subsequent years, with the growth of social media, customers were able to vent through using social media. There was also growth of mobile channels. So that kind of shifted the power from big retailers to the consumers. And with this growth of mobile channels, there was this growing expectations from consumers to shop anytime, anywhere. And so that shifted from multi-channel to this kind of an omni-channel.
mm,
And that is and that journey continues, over the years. There's been a focus. Although my research focused, the period I analyze more is before the COVID, but
mm.
I bet you that acceleration has just, speeded up.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So the complexity is clearly there, but the payoff isn't always as obvious as we are led to believe. Most CEOs assume that integrating online and offline channels is an automatic win for the company. However, your research identifies a gap in that logic regarding profitability. What made you decide to look at the internal performance of the firm instead of just the customer experience?
Yeah, no, this is a very important point. At the outset of my research, I also just want to acknowledge very quickly my wonderful collaborator, co-author, and my PhD supervisor, Saurav Ray, Dr. Ray. This particular focus or the question about the profitability is really one that there has been, the research has clearly shown that there is a positive impact on the customer experience. There is a value to the customer through this cross-channel integration. Um, However, there is a anecdotal evidence about the effectiveness of omnichannel. Does it pay off on the bottom line or not? And so one was that there was a there wasn't enough empirical evidence and
Mm,
the underlying mechanism of how really the retailers can create and claim values, and are there certain boundary conditions. So our research really unpacks this because this, without having an empirical evidence about the profitability or about the effectiveness of omni-channel integration, the business case or the questions about the business case of investing into new technologies will linger always.
mm,
So that was a sort of a one motivation for investigating this point.
mm,
Second, also, I must say that there was some research done in the early part, which was really more focused on the impact of omni-channel retailing on sales or on revenue. And maybe some of the early research which explored this revenue part was in the time frame was much limited, and that means that the industry was still evolving. We needed a longer time frame to understand the steady state of this retailing, omni-channel retailing, and so we were able to really have a longer time frame, which allows us to sort of investigate this issue.
yeah. Wonderful. Bharat, let's talk about how you utilized a massive data set of over 1,200 observations across different firms and time. How did you set up to actually measure something as invisible as channel integration?
Yeah, no, this is first of all, I actually thought that, the retail industry provides a really good context because this has been evolving. And there is we look at the public listed retailers, multi-channel retailers in the US. So we able to have access to data about their financial and accounting data. But the challenge was really to understand this degree of channel integration. So there are some measures, but we build on the measures. But we use a textual analysis. So we collect information from 10K reports, and we also look at any other public records in terms of their investor presentation or other business press, and we code based on their text analysis. So if a firm has made I mean, it is a strategic investment, so on Omnichannel. So if it is, they will likely to publish in their annual reports. And so we were able to, mine that data and do the coding. So that's how the channel integration is done. But very quickly, this channel integration as a measurement can be viewed on a continuum. Like, on one end, firms which are at the very low end of channel integration, which is either they have siloed channels or there is some minimal integration. On the other end, you have firms which are very, very tightly integrated, and they actually are the firms that have transformed their whole organization to focus on providing this so-called seamless customer experience, experience across the channels. So
Mm, mm.
so that's how we do it. I mean, eh, I could go on, so you let me know more on this.
Yeah. So once you looked at all that data, what did you actually discover about the relationship between omni-channel integration and a company's bottom line?
Yeah, sure. Let me give you maybe a step back to just to
Mm,
see why is an issue. Maybe I'm not sure if I was able to explain this better.
mm,
See, as I mentioned earlier, that there was a incentive for retailers to invest or move from multi-channel to the retail to the omni-channel, and at the heart of this omni-channel is this channel integration.
mm,
And what does that mean is really, I would like to explain that there is a coordination at a two level. One is an internal coordination. I mean, these are big retailers like Walmart, Best Buys, Costco, Home Depots. So they have they need to internally coordinate across their functional groups. They need to invest on technology, on a people, on a processes to make sure that the services they are offered across the channels works.
mm,
On the other end, they also need to make sure that there is an external coordination. The contracts with the vendors, with the suppliers, that also need to be, returned and monitored and make sure that all this work in tandem to offer a coordinated, convenient customer experience across the channel. Customer doesn't care, whether there's an internal coordination or external coordination.
yeah,
So that's the one part.
yeah.
But it's not easy. It's costly, it's a complex, it's challenging. So that's the coordination cost part. And of course, firms want to create this value through this channel integration to the customer. So there is this tension between at one end to provide this value, which in some sense we call it's kind of a strategic dividends, which firm wants to get, but then you have these coordination costs. So we unpack that part, which has an impact on sort of the profitability. But when we started looking at it, we looked at a two level. One was we wanted to understand what is it that's driving sort of the retailer's ability to provide a value or a claim a value, and how that is related to the consumer expectations.
mm,
Um, I must also note here that, when I was earlier talking about the evolution of retailing industry,
mm,
um, before there was already in some other sectors, there was already integration happening, or it's kind of a, so if you look at the services, financial services, travel, books and all. So consumers were already exposed to some of that. I mean, there was already expectations set in motion. And so if you, so what we find, which is the interesting thing, is that consumers don't see a value at a lower level of integrations. There is only after a certain level of integration, customer sees a value in that.
mm,
And so, our one interesting point we found is that actually there is a U-shaped relationship between channel integration and the revenue.
mm,
So on an average, we find that, it's only after a certain level you see an impact of the revenue, channel integration on the revenue. And so that was to us interesting, and we, look at it from various angles to make sure that this is a robust, results. And what we also find is that because there is a bandwagon effect, firms are jumping and it creates a competitive pressure. Um, Many firms actually not only jump on this bandwagon, but they also advertise that we also offer omni-channel, even if they are not ready because of the bandwagon effect. And we find that this U-shaped relationship, which is the revenue and integration, the with the advertisements is actually exacerbate this problem. So it's kind of, it has a negative impact on that. And so this was also a very interesting finding, which we find in that. And then finally, the your question about the profitability and in the integration was that the on an average we find that yes, there are firms can claim or firms can create value through the omnichannel, but there are limits to this. There are boundary conditions, and firms should be aware of that. And maybe we can talk later on in terms of the exact findings where what those boundary conditions are.
yeah. So that's a sobering discovery for any retail executive. Uh, Bharat, can you explain the logic for us? Why does creating a seamless experience for the customer so often lead to a coordination trap for the retailer?
Yeah, I mean there are one is that as I was mentioning that there is this or let me put it this way, there are few motivating factors that kind of relates to this question is one that there is already a higher consumer expectations.
Mm,
And so you you need, in order to survive, you need to have a certain level of integration before consumers can even see a value in your offering. For example, if your competition is offering a buy online and pick up, and if you are not offering, then you are at a disadvantage. So there is a consumer expectations coupled with this bandwagon effect because of the competition.
mm,
Normally, the retailers do not have enough time or enough. They need to move. They need to move quickly. And as I mentioned, that yes, they need to move, but it's not easy. You need to do internal coordination, you need to do external coordination, and sometime without having these things in place, you may end up offering services, advertising that, and you that could lead to a lot of these hidden costs or costs which are not very obvious because you have not invested in processes. There aren't enough training issues. Just to give you one example,
Mm,
that if the processes are not in place, if you do not have enough controls, this could not only lead to subpar services, but it could lead to data breaches. It could
mm,
have a huge reputational risk.
mm,
So all of that actually amounts to or requires a significant coordination cost.
mm, mm. So it seems the very thing that makes the customer happy is what makes the boardroom sweat. Based on these findings, Bharat, what is the most important change a retail manager should make to their strategy tomorrow?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in terms of some of the managerial sort of the implications, I would say that first is that I think I made at some point here. Just want
Take
to
your
make
time.
sure. Okay, so one is that these coordination costs, these are enormous for the retailers, and often companies don't account for these coordination costs because they are part of the administrative, cost and coordination. They are not reported on financial statement, and so firms really needs to be mindful of that before launching omnichannel integration. And in some sense, they are like, we call sometimes that this is like an iceberg. 90% of the costs are hidden. So firms should take a time to invest on processes, people, technology before launching the omnichannel. But also the there is, which is actually in some sense it's a in line with the normative prescription of Williamson, which talks about that or Williamson's transaction cost economics, that we really need to ensure that we calibrate our omnichannel commitments to proactively manage and minimize these costs.
Mm,
So that's the one part. But then there are few other points which I think are very specifically relevant to managers. One is we find that there is a retailers that have a large uh, retail networks, like the number of physical stores,
mm,
which is how we measure the size of the retail networks, that actually have a negative effect that that is kind of balloons the whole cost, coordination cost. So retailers that have a large retail networks, they need to be more mindful of managing these coordination costs and proactively minimizing that. So that was the one interesting point we find. Um, I could more, talk about why, but I will leave it there. The other
yeah.
part also we found was that for the managers, practicing managers, is that these sectors where there was a significant change in the sales. So we term that as an industry turbulence, where there was a higher industry turbulence. We find that there is that actually allows retailers to sort of test and try quickly and recalibrate their sort of organizational learning and do it better. So in those sectors, firms did better than where the industry turbulence was low.
Mm, mm,
And so this suggests that this is kind of a canary in the coal mine. This gives you an idea first to try and keep, seeing what works and do
Mm,
that.
mm,
So that was the other thing. And lastly, I would say that, that don't promise the moon. It's like, you have you launch Omnichannel. If you're not ready, do not advertise and further um, uh, elevate the consumer expectations, which are already high. So those were a few things which I think are particularly relevant for our managers.
yeah. So these are a great tactical start. Uh, but looking at the data, does your research suggest that there is a safe speed for this integration, or is the rush to be the first part of what creates the trap?
So speed was really more about that those firms which actually launched early, they were sort of the early entrants. They were able to claim value more.
Mm,
And there were also, again, there were some boundary conditions similar to like those which had a large retail network. It wasn't helping the speed and performance.
mm,
Um, Relationship was actually there is a negative moderating impact of the network, the retail store network on that relationship. So, but I will leave it there.
mm,
Just coming back to since you asked me about data,
mm,
I also want to give you a bit of a context or some flavor of
mhm,
uh, that. Just to give you some sample characteristics, on an average, the annual revenue for these retailing firms was $21 billion.
mm,
So you're talking about, firms of average size is quite big. There are around 1,900 plus stores on an average by the firm, and with almost 96,000 employees. Now there are some big firms like Walmart, which kind of skewed this average, but still a large. And then also we measured their sort of the e-commerce experience, how many years of experience they have in managing their e-transaction capabilities. And that was around, on an average, 8 years, with around $270 million of advertising spend annually. And with a 7% return on assets. So fairly profitable firms, around 5 times they turn over their inventory. So again, efficient inventory management.
mm,
So it kind of gives you that these, on an average, these are big retailers,
mm,
and in some sense, with that size and with that, there is a complexity of moving
mm,
this mammoth big organizations on that
mm.
path. So just wanted to give you a bit flavor of this data.
Yeah, no, that's a great practical takeaway that moves this from a theory into a real business tool. Finally, Bharat, looking at your own dual role as both a researcher and a veteran manager, how does your coordination capabilities perspective offer a lens that previous researchers might have missed?
Excellent point. There are, first of all, many times,
Mm,
researchers may have
mm,
or may not realize these nuances in terms of
mm,
that even a vertically integrated firm, these retailers like, Home Depot or Walmart, others, there are still coordination costs. And these coordination costs are not very obvious.
mm,
I was a channel manager once upon a time for a bank, and we actually changed our organization from a channel to a product focus. And there we realize now, you just need to do this coordination across channel, and suddenly you realize that there are different competencies when you are managing online. There are different competencies when you are managing branches. and those create frictions, and they are not very obvious sometimes.
mm,
And so, in some sense, maybe my experience of working sort of created that interest to explore this further. And as we digged deeper, I think we were able to uncover a little bit more on this. So
mm,
that was a one thing I found. But also, I must say that it's the other way around. As I explored more scholarly research, that also informed my industry experience.
mm.
So this, I think, is a more sort of a dual action here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's that manager turned scholar perspective that really makes the coordination trap feel so authentic. Bharat, looking ahead, now that you have identified the coordination trap, what is the next research question you're looking to solve in the world of retail?
Um, we are, well, there is in terms of the omni-channel retailing, have a few other questions in mind. One, as I briefly alluded about the speed, we actually are exploring that the speed issue, first mover, second mover advantage. This has been, there is the speed and order. Sometimes, when we talk about speed, it conflicts
Mm,
between speed and or early or late entrants. So we are actually trying to disentangle this aspect that you could be actually early entry, but you decide to go slowly.
mm,
You want to take your time. Or you could be late entrant. That means you don't offer and then
mm,
zoom or speed things. So we're trying to understand and disentangle that what is that relationship. That's one point we are exploring. The other point which I'm really interested is about the growth of these AI agents. The agentic channel. How are they going to? Are they is that a new channel? Is it going to influence big enough to sort of
mm,
reshape some of our consumer preferences or the way that channel can be offered? So those are very early stage on that. There are a few other things more in terms of a temporal, like a temporary price promotions across the channels.
mm.
How do you manage that in online or offline? So some of those things are on the hopper right now.
You have some great question to explore, and definitely going to keep you busy. Bharat, thank you for helping us understand the coordination trap today. It has been a real pleasure. We wish you the very best in your teaching and your research.
Same here. Thank you so much, David. Glad to be here.